We ended with Amos 9:11 through 15, which is that kind of statement of hope he ends with, talking about the kingdom of God, the messianic kingdom, talking about God's coming and the restoring of the kingdom, and that the nations would come to God as well. By the nations that God would call to himself, because that's what James in Acts 15 quotes to talk about that the Gentiles would be saved in the era of the last days, in the era of Messiah. So anyway, but now we're going to get into the book of Micah, and kind of where we're headed with this is we're going to get into Micah, then we're going to step away from the minor prophets again for a little bit. We have to do them in parts because there's not only the fact that there's 12 of them, but they happen in different time periods. And then we'll have to get into the book of Isaiah, which is a huge book, but it's also not just huge in length, but in significance, because it really takes the prophets and all like the Bible and kind of plugs it all together and talks about how God is going to accomplish these things, his kingdom, his glory filling the earth through salvation. And why I bring Isaiah up is because Isaiah and Micah are what you call contemporaries. They are living, preaching, prophesying at the same time. They probably knew each other. Okay, and one of the ways that indicates this is Isaiah 2:1 through 4 is identical to Micah 4:1 through 4. Right. So the question is, they're both getting it from God. But does one of them borrow that language from the other? Right? We don't exactly know who. Micah is taking place in about 735, and he is warning both the north, but he's also especially warning the south. Okay? He's warning the southern kingdom of Judah, particularly the Davidic kings. And Micah has a lot of fulfilled prophecies in it. He prophesies the fall of the northern kingdom. He prophesies the fall of the southern kingdom. He prophesies the destruction of the temple. And he prophesies the coming of Messiah. He prophesies that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And we'll see why that's the case. And then he also talks about, since these things happened in this way, God will accomplish all the promises for his kingdom as well. Okay. So let's talk about his name. Micah's name means who is like Yahweh, who is like God. And you might want to write down as a note Micah 7:18, because toward the end of the book, at the almost end, the last couple of verses, Micah says a prayer of worship where he says, "Who is a God like you?" And then says that basically the unique aspect that he points to about that no one is like God is that God pardons and forgives sin. Okay? So Micah starts to recognize how God is going to bring together all these promises is going to be through forgiveness of sin. Okay, so just keep that in mind for a little bit. So Micah is taking place around probably 735 BC, which means that he's about 15 years or a little less from kind of what's a big event of God's judgment that's going to take place in the 720s.
Is it that Israel gets destroyed?
Yes, the northern kingdom of Israel gets destroyed by the Assyrians, right? And this is, Micah references this, talks about that this is going to happen. Then, in another handful of years, down to about 600 to 586, the southern kingdom is going to get destroyed by Babylon. The temple will be destroyed. The Davidic kingdom will be taken into captivity. The people will be killed or taken into captivity. And so that's going to be catastrophic. But it's what God said. So it's not like God's failed or forgotten. It's that God says, no, I'm bringing Assyria. I'm bringing Nebuchadnezzar on you because of your sins. So God's faithful to his word. That's kind of part of the hope here, is even while he's judging them, he said what was going to happen, and it happened. right? So that'll actually be a thing in Isaiah, as he said, I had control over the past. You saw what I told you would happen, and it took place. Therefore, when I tell you about the future, you know that that will take place as well. Okay. So Micah is preaching all of these things. Yes?
Can I use the bathroom real quick?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Micah is a fairly simple book. It basically breaks down into 3 cycles. Okay? He basically has 3 cycles in the book. And this is like the easiest book to see this in. Lots of books do this. Hosea does this. Isaiah does this. But Micah, it's a very clean book in the way that he does this. Is he has cycles of judgment and hope. Okay? He has cycles where he'll be talking about the severity of God's judgment, what's going to take place, and how the kingdom's going to be destroyed, the temple's going to be destroyed, all this stuff. And then he's going to switch and talk about God's saving work in the future, restoring the kingdom, bringing Israel back, all of these things, and this hope for kingdom and salvation in the future. So the question is, this has actually led some unbelieving scholars to ask the question of, is Micah multiple authors? Because he seems schizophrenic, right? He goes from saying one thing that's really bad to saying one thing that's really good. But it's not that Micah is written by different people. It's that because you can see the continuing theme throughout the whole book and connections of different things like this. That being said, what he's doing is he's saying, okay, here's the bad news. Here's the future good news. The kind of question is how to bridge these things or bring them into consistency. Okay, so it's like, well, what has to happen in these in between that brings Israel and the world from a place of judgment to a place of God's hope, salvation, and kingdom? Okay. And we'll see that Isaiah will elaborate on this, Zechariah will elaborate on this, and they will talk about it has to come through. Isaiah's name means Yahweh is salvation. Okay, so it means God's going to have to save. He's going to do it particularly through the Messiah. Okay, so this is going to be important because Israel would be, in the time of Jesus, they're reading the prophets, and they're saying, okay, I know there's going to be a future coming kingdom of God, even though we're in a state of exile. When the Messiah comes, they say, okay, he's going to defeat our enemies, he's going to rebuild a greater temple, and he's going to be the king. That's true, but they don't understand Jesus and his role, because Jesus, when he comes, needs to accomplish forgiveness of sins to let all the rest of this happen. So he needs to accomplish salvation of his people, saving them from their sins in order to produce the kingdom of God. That's what they missed about Jesus in his role as the suffering servant as he comes. Okay, so anyway, Micah has these cycles, but let's talk about Micah chapter 1 and look at this kind of his introduction and then his kind of purpose statement, where he announces worldwide judgment, and then he narrows it down to say, okay, but the reason why there's worldwide judgment is because it comes down to the responsibility of certain individuals who have greater responsibility than others. Okay, and so look at Micah 1:1. He's easy to put a date on when he preaches because he gives us these little details. Look at Micah 1:1. It says, the word of Yahweh which came to Micah of Morsheth. Okay, so he's a kind of a farmer, by the way. He's not quite like Amos, but he's a fig picker. Okay, Micah of Morsheth in the days of Jotham, bad king; Ahaz, bad king; Hezekiah, good king. Okay, so he lays out a time span of when he's prophesying. Jotham is a bad king. Ahaz is during the time it's mentioned in Isaiah 7. Isaiah goes and confronts him. Okay, and then Hezekiah is a friend of Isaiah's, is a really good king, but he is the king that says, because Assyria is such a threat, maybe we should team up with this other up-and-coming nation called Babylon. Okay, and so that does not go very well, obviously. Okay, so then he says, which he saw concerning Samaria, northern capital, and Jerusalem, southern capital. So Micah kind of preaches to both. Okay, so listen to what he... can somebody read Micah 1, 2 through 4? Micah 1, 2 through 4. Yeah, Patrick.
Awesome. Hold on one second.
Because notice how God's judgment is described here. So yeah, whenever you're ready.
Woe to those who devise wickedness and work evil on their beds. When the morning dawns...
No. Micah 1.
Oh, my bad.
That's okay.
The word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. Hear you peoples, all of you, pay attention, O earth, and all that is in it, and let the Lord go be a witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. For behold, the Lord is coming out of his place, and he will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth. And the mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will split open, like wax before the fire, like waters poured down a steep place. Okay,
so God's judgment is described. God says he's coming to judge the earth. God's in his throne, he's in his temple, and now he's coming down from his place to judge the earth, and the mountains are going to melt like wax. So this is worldwide cataclysmic judgment on all peoples, all nations. Okay, but the fate of the nations, the fate of the world, and we see this in the Abrahamic covenant, is tied up with the kind of fate and the responsibility of what nation? Israel, yep. Okay. So the fate of the nations has to do with the fate of Israel, right? So you have God's wrath and judgment on the world, but that's because of Israel. Can somebody read the first, just sentence of Micah 1:5?
All this.
Sophia. Yes.
I'm so sorry. Just take me out of it.
That's okay.
Here. For the transgressions of Jacob is all this, and for the sins of the house of Israel.
Right.
What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what are the high places of Judah? Are they not Jerusalem?
Okay, very good. So, a couple of things to note there. It says, okay, worldwide judgment is coming, all this for the transgression of Jacob, for the sin of Israel. Okay, so, but then it narrows that down even further, that Israel, yes, the individuals sin, yes, the group sins, but it also points out more specific individuals who are responsible for Israel. Sophia, could you read the last part of Micah 1:5 again?
What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what are the high places of Judah? Are they not Jerusalem? Okay, so we get a hint here.
Samaria and Jerusalem in Israel, the north, and Judah, the south. Samaria and Jerusalem are what? They're cities, but what kind of cities? Think like, well, yeah, Jerusalem has the temple, but think like Sacramento.
They're capitals.
Capitals, yes. So these are the capitals, okay? Now, it's going to narrow it down even further and say, okay, the world is being judged for their sins, but the fate of the world is tied up because Israel's sin, Israel's failure. Okay, so if Israel fails, the world fails. And then he narrows it down to the capitals and the rulers. Okay, in particular, the kings. All right, so we're going to see this in a couple of places, but basically talks about in 1:14, talks about here the kings of Israel. Okay, so this is in 1:14. Okay, so remember, the kings represent the whole group, and the group is represented in their king. So if the king sin, it's bad for the group. If the people sin, it's bad for the king, right? You guys understand this? Right? So basically, here's what Micah is going to say. In Micah 1:15, he's going to say that there's going to be a collapse of the Davidic throne and kingdom. That the Davidic promises are done, they're suspended. Okay, so hang on. So we're going to come back to that in a second. But he's going to describe this as, he's going to say the glory of Israel. And by the glory of Israel, he's not talking about God, he's actually talking about the kings. They're the representatives of Israel's glory in that sense. The glory of Israel goes into, and then we need to do a little fill in the blank here. Look at 1:15, Micah 1:15. It says the glory of Israel goes into this certain region, and this is going to be important because Micah is trying to make a point. So look at Micah 1:15. It says the glory of Israel goes into, Bryn? Adullam. Yeah. It doesn't matter, how you pronounce it. Hebrew, words, the pronunciation is actually that important all the time. Okay, so Adullam, however you want to say it. Now, you may not recognize this name, okay? But think back 300 years previous to this, to David, okay? David in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Remember, he's on the run from Saul, and what type of area does he go and hide in? Where does he hide himself in order to get away from Saul? Yeah.
Cave.
In a cave. Yeah. David goes and hides himself in the caves of Adullam while he's on the run before he becomes king. Okay. Now think about it like this. Micah is saying the Davidic kingdom. There have been Davidic kings for almost 300 years by this point. Okay? So now you've had 200 years of kings in David's line, starting with Solomon. Okay? But now Micah comes along and says, God's judgment, the kings have failed so badly that God's going to judge the world because Israel's failed, and the kings of Israel are going to go back to Adullam, where David started before he was king. What does that sound like Micah, God through Micah, is saying is happening to the throne of David? That basically, what is he doing to it? Destroying. It's like he's bringing it, it's like he's wiping everything off and starting over. Okay, you guys see that?
Like a flood.
So, what's that?
Didn't he promise never to do that again with the flood though?
Well, yeah, with the flood, but we're going to have some other problems that we have to deal with the Davidic covenant, because we'll get to that in a second. But what we have to understand, what Micah is getting at, is he says now God is going to destroy, in a sense, the kingdom of David and wipe everything off the map until it's basically they're starting over at square one. Okay. Now, what are the problems? These aren't problems for God, but these are tensions that Micah needs us to understand of how severe God's judgment is here. The kingdom of David's going to collapse. But why is that a problem? What are the problems of that because of the Davidic covenant? What did the Davidic covenant promise to David that God would fulfill?
The Messiah through the Davidic line.
Okay, coming of the Messiah through the Davidic line. Okay, that's still going to happen, but what else? What is in 2 Samuel 7, 8 through 13? What types of things does God promise David and his sons as the Davidic king because of the Davidic covenant? How long is David's kingdom and throne supposed to last? Forever. He's supposed to have an eternal throne and an eternal kingdom, and God is always supposed to have a man on the throne. God also said, I'm not going to throw you away and remove my loving kindness from you like I did to Saul. Okay? So he says, David, your kingdom is you're going to have Israel be planted in the land. You're going to give them peace. Now, the judgment is so severe, they're going to get kicked out of the land. God says, you're not going to have a king for the time being. The promises will not be fulfilled for the time being. And it's like you're going back all the way to the caves where David started. Okay? So, here's... that's what Micah is getting at. So God is telling them, look, this is over in a sense, right? So, but it's not totally over. He's going to announce some hope here, but you need to see that this is taking place, right? What's Israel's other problem? The Abrahamic covenant promises them that they will be what? And this also ties into the nations. The Abrahamic covenant promises Israel. Well, what does the Abrahamic covenant promise Israel? Remember the Abrahamic covenant.
Oh, that they would have rest, land, seed, blessing, a king.
Well, it gets to a king later, but yes, land. But they're going to get kicked out of the land. Seed, okay, still have that. And then blessing. But if they're cursed, he also promised them, hey, look, if you don't keep the law, you're going to get these curses, right? So God's fulfilling what he said. But then the question is this. There's supposed to be a blessing to all the nations. In them, all the nations will be blessed. But if Israel gets kicked out of the land, if Israel is cursed, they cannot be a blessing to all the nations. Now God says, I'm still going to teach the other nations about myself through you, but I'm going to teach them through your judgment. They're going to say, what happened to Israel, God's people? And they're going to say, we fell into idolatry, and this is what happened. Okay? So there's problems here as far as what Micah is saying. It's not that this is a contradiction in the Bible, but this is a tension that needs to be resolved. Okay? That needs to be reconciled. Okay, so we have this collapse of the Davidic throne. Okay, let me give you guys just a preview for coming up later in Micah, so you can keep this in mind for when we get there. David was born where? What city is David born? Bethlehem. David is from Bethlehem, right? So he's from this little town. Now, David, after he becomes king, he takes over this area called Jebus. And renames it Jerusalem or Zion and makes that the capital. All the kings after David are born, guess where? Not Bethlehem, but Jerusalem. They're born in the capital. Okay? But here's the idea. If God wipes the whole Davidic throne off the map to start the whole thing over, guess where the next Davidic king is going to be, who will actually reign, the right king, is going to be born. Not Jerusalem, but where? Bethlehem. That's why Micah emphasizes in Micah 5:2 that the Messiah will come from Bethlehem. Okay? This is why Matthew 2 picks up on that Jesus is born in Bethlehem under these circumstances. So it's not just fun Bible trivia or prophecy. It's that the reason why Jesus is born in Bethlehem is, you guys think, see if you can infer this. Why is Jesus born in Bethlehem according to Micah? If the throne has failed, God starts the whole thing over. What's Jesus born in Bethlehem to show? As the new Davidic king, he's the king that what?
He's the king of all in Judah.
Well, yes, that's true, but I'm trying to get you guys to see the logic of where Micah is going here. David's born in Bethlehem, all the other kings are in Jerusalem, but the Davidic kingdom collapses. It goes all the way back to the beginning, so the Messiah is born in Bethlehem to show what?
That he's the king of Israel?
He's the king of Israel, but really the point is that he's starting the whole thing over.
Oh.
That he's getting it right this time. And so that's why Jesus is born there, that he's the true greater David who can start the Davidic dynasty the right way and actually fulfill the Davidic covenant. Okay, so that will be important. We'll get to that. We'll get to that later. Okay, so that's why it matters that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Okay, so he goes through the first cycle of judgment, which is basically 1, 2 around there to 2, 12 and 13. But I want us to notice something here about what how God describes this restoration that takes place. Can somebody read Micah 2, 12 through 13? Yeah, Abigail.
I will surely assemble all of you, O Jacob. I will gather the remnant of Israel. I will set them together like sheep in a fold, like a flock in its pasture, a noisy multitude of men. He who opens the breach goes out before them. They break through and pass the gate, going out by it. Their king passes on before them, the Lord at their head. Okay,
thank you. Okay, so that's the little, kind of short cycle of hope. But God says, he promises a couple of things here that we need to make note of. So he says he's going to, he says he's going to regather Israel. Okay? Now Israel has not had a king, but it mentions a king here. So we'll see. God does restore the Davidic covenant. He does restore the Davidic kingdom. Just this time it's going to be under the Messiah. Okay? Because Ezekiel says this as well. He says the kings are done until the one comes who can actually be the right king. Okay, this is in Ezekiel 21. Okay, so he says he's going to regather Israel, but what's the language used here? What is God being described as in Micah 2, 12 and 13? He says he's going to regather Israel, but they're going to be like this, and God is going to be like this. How is God described here? What type of job, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Okay, look at 2:12. Look at how the people are described, and look at how God is described in 2:12. See if you can pick up on and in 13. But see how are the people described? God's going to regather them. There are lots of ways you can do this or illustrate this, but what type of job is God described like? Yeah.
Like a shepherd.
Yeah, he's described like a shepherd, right? So he says Israel are called sheep and stuff like this. So he's described here as a shepherd, having a relationship where he regathers his sheep. Okay, so they're going to come back into the land. Okay, but God decides to describe this like sheep. Okay, so that'll be important. And then it talks about Yahweh goes ahead of them and leads them, and it says their king. This is the Messiah at their head. Okay, so a couple things to note here. Now we have a connection between, which we've always had since 2 Samuel 5. David was called a shepherd king, right? He's a shepherd. He was literally a shepherd, but they said to him, "You've shepherded us even when Saul was over us. You were our shepherd." And then David, remember Psalm 23, probably most famous psalm. David calls God his what? The Lord is my shepherd, right? So he says ultimately God is the one who asks, even though I'm called to be a shepherd, the prophets are shepherd, the priests are shepherd, the kings are shepherd. These shepherds are bad in a lot of cases, but David says ultimately I need God to be my shepherd. Yahweh is my shepherd, right? So now God says he will act like the shepherd and restore Israel. Okay, what does this, yes? Yeah. Okay, what does this sound like? Jesus in John 10 comes and says, I am the what? No, that's John 14. Think what we're talking about right now.
Shepherd.
I am the, not just the shepherd, good shepherd. Yeah. Okay, so this is what Jesus is claiming. Okay, when he talks about being their good shepherd. okay, in John 10. Okay, so when Jesus comes and says, I am, okay, so this is an I am statement of Jesus that he's borrowing from God in Exodus 3:14, but also in other places where God says, I am. Jesus is saying that, okay, so he's claiming to be God, but he's saying, I am the good shepherd. I am God as the shepherd here to shepherd my people, but also he's saying by being the good shepherd that he is their true king, that he's the right king. Okay, so the shepherd thing is going to be big in, well, here. Micah 5:4 talks about the one who comes from Bethlehem is going forth from eternity. That's Micah 5:2. But then it talks about he will shepherd God's people in the strength of Yahweh his God. Okay, so talks about him as a shepherd. And then Micah 7:14, Micah at the end prays to God and says, shepherd us with your scepter, O God. Okay, so basically there's repeating language of God and the Messiah as the good shepherd to come to save Israel. So basically, Israel fails, all their kings fail, and then basically God says, I'm going to come myself to be your shepherd and save you. And that will be in the person of the Messiah. Okay, so that's what Jesus is getting at in John 10. And then how does, you guys remember in John 10, well, lots of places, he actually repeats this like 4 times. What does Jesus say of how he's going to shepherd his sheep? What he's going to do? I'm the good shepherd who, what? For my sheep. Fill in the blank, who blank for my sheep.
Dies.
Lays down my life, dies for my sheep. So that's what the key is going to be here, is that they didn't understand. They thought he'd just come as a shepherd king. But he says, the good shepherd lays down his life for my sheep. Okay, so that's what Jesus is getting at. That's why they wanted to kill him, because he said, everybody else is a thief and a robber, a bad shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. I am God in the flesh and your true king. And they obviously didn't accept that. And Jesus said, you don't believe because you're not my sheep, in John 10:26. So anyway, but so you can see what Jesus is saying there. That would be a great topic for your Old New Testament use of the Old Project, is Jesus as Good Shepherd, and then filling in the blank with all the Old Testament passages on that, because there are quite a few. They refer to God as the shepherd, the Messiah as the shepherd as well. Okay, so that's a cycle of hope, but then Micah gets into another cycle of judgment where he zeroes in again on the leadership. Okay, can somebody read Micah 3:1? Yeah, Patrick.
And I said, hear you heads of Jacob, and rulers of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know justice?
Okay. Yes, thank you. Because it ends there on kind of a rhetorical question, so that may sound a little awkward at first, but yeah. So what he's getting at here is, notice he points out 2 kind of ways of saying the same thing about leadership: heads of Jacob, rulers of the house of Israel. So he's saying, look, this is a failure of leadership. Leaders of family, leaders of tribes, leaders of groups, judges. You guys have failed. You're supposed to know justice, but you pervert justice, is basically what Micah accuses them of, that God identifies here. And then there's also the prophets who prophesy falsely that he's going to talk about in Micah 3. Micah's going to confront a false prophet that's telling everybody everything's fine, everything's peace, everything's good right now. God's not unhappy with you. We have God's presence. And Micah says that that's not true. I'll show you that in a minute. But then the priests are also taking bribes. And they're saying, hey, look, I'll offer this sacrifice. I'll tell you, what's good from God if you give me some money. And so they're getting bribes from people. And then the kings are perverted and sinful as well. Right? So this is kind of all over the place. Micah talks about, in Micah 3:5, he points to the prophets, and he says, look, Thus says Yahweh concerning the prophets who lead my people astray. Okay? And he cries to them, they cry peace. Okay, so they think that that they could just tell everybody that everything's fine, that then there's not a problem, that this isn't a big deal, right? So then he also says that Micah says he's a true prophet because he tells the people from God what they don't want to hear. He tells the people their sins. Can somebody read Micah 3:8? Yes, Sophia.
But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin.
Right, so he says, look, the difference is, and he's not bragging about himself, he says that I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Yahweh, and I'm filled with justice, I want to tell you the right thing, and courage. Even when it's... So he's being brave to say this stuff, but his goal is to make known to Jacob his rebellion and Israel his sin. So he says, one of the ways you can tell whether or not somebody's preaching truth is, do they tell people stuff that convicts them of sin? Right? So that's what he says. So the rulers, he says, look, you twist everything. Everything that's right, you twist it. You bring about bloodshed, violent injustice. You judge things based on bribery. You teach for a price. You divine for money. And then they say in 3:11, they say they lean on Yahweh and saying, is not Yahweh in our midst? This is especially in the south where they have the temple. Jeremiah will get really upset with them for this in Jeremiah 7 later on. They basically think that because they have the temple of God, that nothing bad can ever happen to them. God's presence is right here. He's not going to do anything to us. And Ezekiel will tell them, God's presence is going to leave, but God's present here to judge you. Abigail. Yeah. Okay, so this is really bad because, look, the temple is going to get destroyed. Here's where Micah has another fulfilled prophecy, basically over 100 years in advance. Can someone read Micah 3:12? Bryn?
Therefore, on account of you, Zion will be plowed as a field, Jerusalem will become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the temple will become high places of a forest. Okay, so Jerusalem and Zion, the city, right, the capital of the south, because of you, it's going to be plowed like a field. Right? Jerusalem is going to become a heap of ruins, including the temple. Right? So he's prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem 100 plus years in advance. Okay, now the